No nanny lasted with the Vampire King's twins, until a human maid did the impossible awesome. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The castle loomed against the stormy sky like an ancient sentinel, its towering spires stretching toward the heavens. Inside, the air was thick with tension, echoing with the soft murmurs of the court and the distant cries of children. But these were no ordinary children. The Vampire King's twins, cursed from birth, had terrified every nanny that came before. Each one, no matter how experienced, had failed to survive the task of caring for them. Their tantrums were legendary, their powers unpredictable. No one could endure the chaos they wrought. Enter Emily, a young maid with no real experience in the supernatural. She had been struggling to make ends meet in a world that seemed determined to push her down. Her life had always been a series of odd jobs, none of them quite fulfilling, but they kept her going. She had no idea what she was walking into when she took this job. The castle, with its cold stone walls and the distant echoes of its dark history, was a far cry from her humble upbringing. Yet, desperation had led her here. She had no choice but to accept the job, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. When she first laid eyes on the twins, she knew there was something different about them. They didn't look like normal children. Their eyes, glowing faintly with an unnatural hue, and their pale skin gave them an eerie, otherworldly presence. They were seated in the grand dining hall, surrounded by elaborate dishes, yet their faces remained expressionless. They didn't laugh or cry like children their age. They only stared. But it wasn't just the children that made Emily uneasy. The entire castle seemed alive with an ominous energy, a quiet but palpable power that radiated from every corner. The Vampire King, the twins' father, was an enigmatic figure, known for his immense power and cold demeanor. Emily had heard rumors about him, how he ruled with an iron fist and had no tolerance for weakness. But what struck her most was the absence of warmth in his eyes. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't kind either. His gaze, when it landed on her, made her feel as though she were a mere pawn in a game far bigger than her understanding. As Emily approached the twins, she could feel the weight of their gaze. She knew that no one had lasted long with them, and a small part of her wondered if she would be the next one to fail. But then something unexpected happened. The girl, a tiny figure no more than 6 years old, reached out and grabbed her hand. Emily froze. The child's grip was surprisingly strong, and for a moment, Emily felt a wave of coldness wash over her. But then the child smiled, an eerie, unsettling smile that seemed to hold a secret. It was as if she knew something Emily didn't. A chill ran down her spine. Emily knew she had just stepped into something far beyond her control. The question was, would she be able to endure it? Would she be the one to finally survive the impossible task? Only time would tell. But in that moment, as the storm raged outside, Emily made a vow to herself. She would not back down. Not this time. The next morning, Emily awoke to the sound of distant thunder and the soft flickering of candles. She had barely slept. The castle's towering walls seemed to press in on her, the endless corridors making her feel like she was trapped in a maze. The twins had slept soundly for the first time since her arrival, their faces calm, but she knew better than to think it would last. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling through the castle's ancient windows, but inside, all was eerily quiet. Emily rose from her bed, stretching her sore muscles, and glanced at the cold, stone walls. The fire crackled in the hearth, offering little warmth against the chill that settled deep into her bones. She quickly got dressed in her simple maid uniform, the fabric worn and frayed from months of use. It was a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. The castle's grandeur, with its golden chandeliers and elaborate tapestries, felt almost like a different world from her humble upbringing. But it was the only world she knew now. She had no choice but to adapt. As she made her way to the grand dining hall, the silence was broken only by the echo of her footsteps on the cold marble floor. The twins were already sitting at the long, polished table, their eyes fixed on her as she entered. She tried not to let the weight of their gaze unsettle her, but it was hard not to feel like a tiny, insignificant speck under their watchful eyes. The girl, who had been so quiet the night before, looked up at Emily with those glowing, otherworldly eyes, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. Emily set the breakfast down in front of them, her hands shaking slightly as she placed the food on the table. "Good morning," she said softly, offering a hesitant smile. The girl didn't respond, but the boy, his hair as dark as the night sky, suddenly looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "You're still here," he said in a low voice, his tone devoid of warmth, but not unkind. Emily nodded, unsure of what to say. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, forcing confidence into her voice. The boy's gaze hardened for a moment, but he said nothing more, turning his attention back to his sister. Emily's heart raced, but she steadied her breath. She wasn't going to let them break her. Not this time. Over the next few days, Emily found herself getting into a rhythm. The twins were challenging, but not impossible to manage. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was often in cryptic phrases that left Emily confused and unsettled. But there were moments, small moments, when she felt like she was starting to connect with them. One evening, as she was cleaning their chambers, the girl walked up to her and touched her arm gently. "You can hear them too," the girl whispered. Emily froze. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The girl's eyes flickered with something that almost looked like fear. "The voices," she said, her voice trembling. "They're always there. In our heads." Emily didn't know what to make of it. She had heard nothing, but the way the girl spoke made her believe that something more was going on beneath the surface. It was then that Emily realized how little she truly understood about the twins, about this castle, and about the vampire king who ruled it. She had come here to care for the children, but now, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something far darker lurking beneath the surface. The twins were more than just children. They were something else entirely. And as Emily navigated the strange, shifting dynamic between herself, the children, and their father, the vampire king, she began to question whether she could truly survive in this world, or if it would consume her like it had done to everyone else before her. The storm outside never seemed to end. Every day, the wind howled louder, the skies grew darker, and Emily felt a growing sense of dread settle over her. She was no longer just a maid in the castle. She was becoming a part of something much bigger, something dangerous, something she didn't fully understand. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to give up. Not yet. The following day, the vampire king summoned her to his private chambers. His voice, when he spoke, was as cold as the stone walls surrounding them. "I trust you are managing my children well," he said, his eyes piercing into hers. Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She nodded. "Yes, my lord," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "They are difficult, but I'm doing my best." The vampire king's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, and for the first time, Emily saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't just cold, but calculating. "I have no patience for failure," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do not disappoint me, Maid." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Emily standing there, her hands trembling. She didn't know what he meant by those words, but she knew one thing for sure: she had to succeed. There was no room for failure in this castle. As she left his chambers, Emily's mind raced. She didn't know if she could handle the pressure, but she knew she had no choice. The twins were her responsibility now, and no matter what it took, she would protect them. But as she walked back down the dark, winding hallways, a new fear crept into her heart. What if the twins weren't the real danger here? What if the vampire king had his own dark secrets that even she wasn't prepared for? The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. She spent her time caring for the twins, trying to keep up with their unpredictable behavior, all the while growing more and more unsure of the world she had stepped into. The castle's walls, once beautiful and awe-inspiring, now felt suffocating, closing in around her like a trap. The vampire king's cold eyes haunted her every move, and she could feel his gaze on her even when he was not in the room. Despite her best efforts, the twins were still as challenging as ever. They would barely speak to her, except for the occasional cryptic remark that sent shivers down her spine. The boy, who had once looked at her with indifference, was growing more distant by the day, his dark eyes filled with something Emily couldn't quite decipher. The girl, on the other hand, was quiet but strangely perceptive. Emily couldn't help but notice how the girl's gaze seemed to follow her wherever she went, and how the silence between them was filled with a heavy tension. It was as if the twins knew something she didn't, something that made their behavior even more unsettling. One evening, after finishing her chores in the kitchen, Emily found herself alone in the grand hallway. The storm had finally passed, leaving the air thick with a strange stillness. As she walked past a narrow staircase, she noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the corridor. Curiosity gnawed at her, and without thinking, she pushed the door open just a crack. The room beyond was dimly lit, the shadows stretching across the floor like fingers reaching for her. It looked like a study, with shelves full of ancient books and scrolls. In the center of the room stood an ornate desk, covered in papers and strange artifacts. But what caught her attention the most was the large, gilded mirror leaning against the wall. The mirror was unlike any she had ever seen before, its surface gleaming with an unnatural light. She felt an odd pull toward it, as if it were calling to her. As she stepped closer, her heart began to race. The air around her seemed to grow colder, and the faint sound of whispering filled her ears. She couldn't make out the words, but the voice sounded strangely familiar, as if it were calling her name. Emily hesitated for a moment, but then, driven by an unknown force, she reached out and touched the mirror's surface. The moment her fingers made contact, a jolt of energy shot through her body. She gasped, stumbling backward. The whispering grew louder, now clear and distinct. "Leave," the voice hissed. "Leave while you can." Emily's breath quickened as she backed away from the mirror, her mind racing. What had just happened? She had felt something in that room, something dark and powerful. But what was it? Before she could make sense of it, she heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, she quickly turned and fled down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. As she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with the Vampire King himself. He was standing there, his expression unreadable, his eyes piercing through her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Emily froze, unable to speak. She was caught, her secret exposed. She had never seen him move so fast, but somehow, he was already standing in front of her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity of his power radiating from him. I was just curious," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Curious," he repeated, his lips curling into a slight smile. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, do you?" Emily shook her head, unable to find the words. She had no idea what she had just stumbled upon, but she knew one thing for sure. It was dangerous. The Vampire King's smile faded, and his expression turned cold once again. "Stay away from that room," he said, his voice sharp. "You've been warned." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing there, her heart still racing. She watched him disappear into the darkness, a sense of unease settling over her. What had she gotten herself into? What was the Vampire King hiding, and what had she just uncovered? As the days went on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had seen the mirror, and now she couldn't stop thinking about it. The whispers, the pull she had felt toward it. It all seemed too strange to be a coincidence. She had to know more. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she actually knew about the Vampire King, about the twins, and about this castle. Every day, she learned something new, but the more she uncovered, the more questions arose. She was trapped in a web of secrets, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape. As Emily lay in bed that night, she stared up at the ceiling, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. She knew that she couldn't keep avoiding the truth forever. Something was happening in this castle, something dark and dangerous. And it seemed that no one, not even the Vampire King, was going to tell her the whole story. Days passed, and Emily's unease grew. She had been trying to avoid the mirror and the strange feeling it left in her mind, but it was impossible. The whispers seemed to follow her everywhere, lingering just beyond her reach, a constant reminder of the secrets hidden in the castle. The twins, too, seemed different. The boy, who had been so distant before, had started watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His silent gaze was like a weight, pressing down on her every move. He never spoke, but his eyes said everything. The girl, on the other hand, had grown more withdrawn, her small face a mask of quiet sadness. She still did not speak much, but when she did, her words seemed to have a weight to them, as if she knew things that Emily didn't. One afternoon, while Emily was tending to the twins in their room, she heard a soft knock on the door. She turned, expecting one of the servants, but was surprised to see the Vampire King standing in the doorway. He looked down at her with that cold, calculating gaze, his expression unreadable. "You've been spending time in the study," he said, his voice smooth but firm. Emily felt a pang of panic in her chest, but she quickly masked it. "I was just curious, my lord," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The Vampire King didn't respond immediately, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again. "Curiosity can be dangerous here," he said, his voice low, almost a warning. "I've told you before, stay away from that room." Emily swallowed hard. "I will, my lord," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She couldn't help it. The pressure of his gaze was suffocating. He didn't speak again, but the look in his eyes told her that he was not convinced. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Emily standing there, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what to make of his warning. Was he simply trying to keep her away from something dangerous, or was there more to the story? She didn't know, but she had the feeling that the deeper she went, the more she would uncover things that she wasn't prepared to face. That night, as Emily lay in bed, the silence in the castle felt deafening. The only sound was the distant howling of the wind outside, but even that seemed far away, as if the storm had never passed. She couldn't stop thinking about the Vampire King's warning or the strange power that seemed to emanate from the castle's walls. The mirror, the whispers, and the twins, it all felt like a tangled web, one that she was caught in, and the more she struggled, the tighter it became. She knew she couldn't go on like this. She had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. The next day, when she entered the study again, she didn't expect anyone to be there. She had planned to avoid the mirror, to leave the room untouched, but something drew her in. Her fingers brushed against the ancient books as she moved past the shelves, but her eyes kept drifting back to the mirror. It was as if it was calling to her. Despite the Vampire King's warning, she couldn't resist. She walked toward the mirror, her breath shallow, her pulse quickening. As her fingers touched the cold surface again, the whispering began. It was louder this time, clearer. "You don't belong here," the voice hissed. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Emily stepped back, her heart hammering in her chest. She tried to pull away from the mirror, but it was as though the glass was pulling her in. The room seemed to grow darker, the air thick with a heavy, oppressive force. The whispers intensified, filling her head, drowning out everything else. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, everything went silent. The mirror's surface rippled, and for the briefest moment, Emily saw something. It was a figure, shadowed, indistinct, but it was there, in the mirror. The figure seemed to move toward her, its outline growing clearer by the second. Her breath caught in her throat as the figure began to take shape. It was a man, tall and regal, with eyes that glowed a deep crimson. Emily's blood ran cold. The figure in the mirror was none other than the Vampire King himself. But this was different. His expression was not the cold, calculated one she had seen before. This was something darker, more dangerous. It was as though he was trapped, unable to break free, reaching out to her for help. Emily didn't know what to do. She stood frozen, unable to tear her gaze away from the mirror. Her heart raced as she struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. Was this a vision? A trick of the light? Or something far more sinister? The figure in the mirror stared at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that felt like it was searing into her soul. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the image flickered and vanished. Emily blinked, her mind reeling. The mirror's surface was once again smooth and still, as if nothing had happened. But the feeling that something had changed lingered in the air. The whispers were gone, but Emily could still feel their presence, as if they were watching her, waiting for her next move. She turned quickly, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and rushed out of the study. As she hurried down the hall, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. She didn't know what she had just seen, but she knew one thing for certain. Her curiosity had led her to something far darker than she had ever imagined. And now, there was no turning back. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling silence. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the castle. The mirror, the whispers, the figure, it all felt like a warning. She had tried to tell herself it was just her imagination running wild, but deep down, she knew something far darker was at play. Every step she took in the castle felt like she was walking on the edge of something dangerous. The twins, once distant, now seemed to sense her unease. The boy, always the more observant of the two, had begun watching her even more closely. His gaze no longer held the indifference it once did. Now, there was something else, something far more intense. The girl, still quiet as ever, had begun speaking in riddles that left Emily with more questions than answers. "The truth lies beyond the surface," she said one afternoon, her eyes dark as she stared at Emily. "But only the brave will see it." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The girl's words echoed in her mind, refusing to leave. What was she trying to tell her? What truth was hidden in this castle, and why did it feel like it was slowly choking her? One evening, after another long day of caring for the twins, Emily found herself walking the empty halls of the castle once again. The storm had long passed, but the cold, oppressive air still lingered. She was drawn, as if by an invisible force, to the study, the room she had been warned about, the room with the mirror. Despite the fear that gripped her, Emily couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward it. It was as if the mirror was calling to her, urging her to return. She knew she was taking a risk, but she couldn't stop herself. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door, and she paused for a moment, listening to the silence around her. The castle seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. She pushed the door open, and the familiar chill washed over her. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering candles that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The mirror stood at the far end of the room, its surface still and gleaming. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the very atmosphere was charged with some unseen power. Emily walked toward the mirror, her heartbeat quickening with each step. The whispers were back, faint at first, but growing louder as she approached. "You should not be here," the voice hissed, its tone cold and menacing. But Emily didn't stop. She reached out, her fingers brushing the mirror's surface. As soon as she made contact, the whispers stopped. The room went deathly still. Then, the image in the mirror began to shift. The glass rippled like water disturbed by a stone, and for a brief moment, Emily saw a vision. No, not a vision, a memory. She saw the Vampire King, standing in this very room, his expression full of pain and regret. He was not the powerful, untouchable ruler she had come to know. No, this was a different side of him, one that she had never seen before. His eyes were filled with sorrow as he looked at the mirror, as though he were searching for something he had lost long ago. The image flickered, and suddenly, Emily was no longer looking at the Vampire King. Instead, she saw the twins, his children, standing in the room, their faces contorted in fear and pain. The boy was shaking, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, while the girl looked as if she were crying, though no tears fell from her eyes. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision was gone, replaced by the reflection of Emily in the mirror. She stood there, breathless, her mind spinning. What had she just seen? The Vampire King, his sorrow, the twins, the connection between them all felt like a puzzle she was only just beginning to understand. But what was the meaning of the vision? Why had it shown her that? Before she could gather her thoughts, the door to the study suddenly swung open, and Emily turned to find the Vampire King standing in the doorway, his eyes burning with anger. "I warned you," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You should not have come here." Emily froze, unable to speak. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the tension palpable. The Vampire King stepped forward, his presence filling the space, and for the first time, Emily saw the full force of his power. It was overwhelming, almost suffocating. "You don't understand what you're meddling with," he continued, his voice icy. "This mirror, this place, it holds secrets that should never be revealed. Secrets that could destroy everything." Emily's mind raced, trying to process everything she had just seen. What is it? What are you hiding?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. The Vampire King's expression softened, but only slightly. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not hiding anything, Emily. But you must understand, some things are better left buried. His eyes flashed with an emotion Emily couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or fear. You've already seen too much, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And now, there's no going back. Emily swallowed. Hard, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The secrets of the castle, the twins, the vampire king's mysterious past, everything was tangled together in a web she wasn't sure she could escape from. But one thing was certain. She had been drawn into something much bigger than herself. And the deeper she went, the harder it would be to find her way out. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding as the vampire king stepped closer. She could feel the weight of his presence, the darkness surrounding him, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she could breathe. His anger was palpable, but there was something else in his eyes, something more vulnerable, as if he were battling some deep, personal conflict. You've seen the mirror, he said, his voice cold, and that's a mistake you'll regret. Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. What did I see? Why did you hide it from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The vampire king paused, his eyes softening slightly, though the tension in the room remained thick. It's not about hiding things, Emily, he said, his tone quieter now, though it still carried an edge. It's about protecting you, and protecting them. He gestured toward the twins, who were quietly watching from the doorway. Emily's heart skipped a beat as the children's expressions seemed to shift, their once cold faces now showing something akin to fear. What do you mean by protecting me? And them? She asked, her voice trembling. The vampire king looked at her for a long moment before speaking, his voice low and heavy with the weight of years. The mirror is not just a reflection, Emily. It holds memories, secrets, things that should never be uncovered. The twins, my children, have a connection to it, a curse, one that has followed our family for generations. It's not just them who are bound by it, but me as well. Emily's confusion deepened. A curse? What kind of curse? She asked, her mind struggling to comprehend what he was saying. It's a curse of power, he replied, his voice growing distant, as if lost in thought. A curse that binds us to the mirror, to the very soul of this castle. The twins were born with it, as was I. But I thought I could protect them from its full power. I thought I could. Stop it. Keep it from destroying everything. Emily's heart clenched at the sorrow in his voice. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, her voice barely audible. The vampire king took a step back, his eyes darkening once more. Because you've seen too much, he said, his voice colder now. And you can't turn back. There's no going back once the mirror has shown you what it's hiding. Emily's thoughts were racing. The weight of what he was telling her was overwhelming. She had known there was something strange about the castle, about the twins, but this was more than she could have ever imagined. What does that mean for me? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. What do I have to do? The vampire king's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. Nothing, he said simply. You have to do nothing. Just stay away from the mirror, from the study. Don't dig any deeper into what you've seen. It's for your own safety. Emily stared at him, her mind swirling. You think I can just forget everything? She asked, disbelief in her voice. You think I can walk away from this and pretend it never happened? The vampire king's gaze hardened once more. I'm trying to protect you, Emily, he said, his voice firm. You don't understand the danger you're in. What you've seen, what the mirror can do, it's not something you can just walk away from. I should have kept you away from it from the beginning. Emily's anger flared. You should have trusted me, she said, stepping toward him, her fists clenched. You should have told me the truth from the start, instead of hiding everything from me like I'm some kind of fool. The vampire king looked at her with a mix of regret and something else, something deeper. I didn't want to drag you into this, Emily, he said quietly. I didn't want you to be part of a curse that's been destroying my family for centuries. I thought I could stop it. But now, his voice trailed off, and he looked away, his jaw clenched. Now you're involved, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. The twins stood in the doorway, their eyes locked on Emily, their faces unreadable. The girl's expression softened slightly, and she stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. You must help him, she said, her eyes wide with something like desperation. You must help him break the curse. Emily turned toward her, her heart racing. What do you mean? How can I help? The girl's gaze flickered to the vampire king, and then back to Emily. The curse can only be broken by the one who has seen the truth, she said, her voice shaking. The one who has seen the mirror, who understands its power. You must help him, or it will consume us all. Emily's mind was spinning. She looked at the vampire king, who seemed just as lost as she was. But I don't know what to do, she said, her voice desperate. I don't understand any of this. The vampire king met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and hope. I never wanted to drag you into this, Emily, he said quietly. But you're the only one who can help. You're the only one who can stop this. Emily's heart was heavy with the weight of his words. She had never imagined her life would lead her here, into a world of curses and dark magic. But now, she knew she couldn't turn away. The truth had been revealed to her, and there was no going back. She had a choice to make: stay and help break the curse, or walk away and let everything fall apart. But there was only one thing she knew for sure. No matter what happened, her life would never be the same again. Emily's mind raced as she stood in the study, the weight of the vampire king's words sinking deeper into her thoughts. She had never imagined her life would take such a dark turn. Now, standing on the precipice of something much larger than herself, she realized there was no turning back. She had seen the truth, felt the pull of the mirror's power, and now, the curse that had plagued the vampire king's family for centuries was hers to face as well. The twins, standing in the doorway, seemed to sense the shift in the air. The girl, who had spoken so cryptically, now looked at Emily with a new urgency. Her wide, innocent eyes held a silent plea, one that Emily couldn't ignore. The boy, as always, was silent, his gaze sharp and calculating. He watched her, not with the coldness he had once shown, but with something far more intense: expectation. The weight of their eyes made Emily feel as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a deep, dark abyss. What do I need to do? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The girl stepped forward, her face serious now, her small hand reaching out to Emily. You must come with us, she said softly, to the chamber beneath the castle, the place where the curse began. The boy nodded silently, his eyes never leaving her. Only there will you understand what you must do to break the curse, he added, his voice cold, yet filled with the knowledge of someone much older than his years. Emily felt a chill run through her, but something within her stirred. She knew, deep down, that this was the only way to find the answers she sought. Without another word, she followed the twins down the winding corridors of the castle, the dark stone walls closing in around them. The air grew colder with each step, and Emily's breath became shallow. It felt as though the very walls were alive, pressing in on her as she followed the twins through the labyrinthine hallways. The castle's atmosphere was thick with magic, its power palpable, and it seemed to grow stronger the deeper they descended. Finally, they reached a heavy, iron door at the end of the hall. The twins paused before it, and Emily could feel the tension building. The boy turned to her, his expression unreadable. Once you enter, there is no turning back, he warned. Are you sure you want to do this? Emily hesitated for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. But then she looked at the girl, who was watching her with a mix of hope and fear in her eyes. Emily took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I have to know the truth. The boy pushed open the door, revealing a vast, dimly lit chamber. The air was thick with ancient power, and in the center of the room stood a large stone altar. On the altar were symbols etched in a language Emily didn't recognize, and an eerie glow seemed to pulse from them. The room felt alive with energy, a strange and powerful force that seemed to hum with every beat of her heart. This is where it all began, the girl said quietly, her voice reverberating in the room. This is where our father's curse was sealed. Emily looked around, her eyes falling on the intricate symbols. What is this place? She asked. The boy stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with an underlying sadness. This is the heart of the curse, the place where our bloodline was bound to the mirror's power. Our father, the vampire king, tried to stop it, but he failed. The curse can only be broken by someone who has seen the truth, the one who is marked by the mirror's magic. Emily's heart raced. You're saying I'm the one who can break it? She asked, disbelief in her voice. The girl nodded. Yes, you are the one who can free us. But first, you must understand the curse's true nature. It is not just a curse on our family. It is a curse on all who come into this castle. Anyone who stays too long is doomed to be consumed by its power. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had to know more. How do I break it? She asked, her voice trembling. The boy looked at her with a solemn expression. You must face the mirror again, he said. Only by confronting the truth within it can the curse be broken. Emily's stomach tightened. But I saw the mirror. I saw the Vampire King's past, and it was too much. How can I face it again? The girl stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to Emily. You must be strong, she said softly. The truth is not always what it seems, but it is the only way. You must break the chains that bind our family, and only you can do that. Emily's mind spun with the enormity of the task ahead. She had already seen so much, but now she had to face the very heart of the curse. She had to look into the mirror again, to uncover its darkest secrets. She knew there was no turning back. With a deep breath, she nodded. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. The twins exchanged a look, and the boy stepped aside, his eyes filled with something that might have been hope. Then let's begin, he said quietly. Emily took one last glance around the chamber, then followed the twins to the center, where the mirror stood waiting. The time had come to face the truth, and she could only hope that, in the end, it would be enough to break the curse that had haunted this family for so long. Emily stepped forward, her breath shallow as she faced the mirror once more. The twins stood silently beside her, their eyes fixed on the glass, waiting. The room, thick with ancient magic, seemed to hum with energy, the air heavy with the weight of secrets long buried. Emily could feel the pull again, the same pull she had felt when she first touched the mirror. It was as if the mirror was alive, its surface a portal to a past she was not sure she was ready to face. She turned to the twins, their faces unreadable. The boy nodded, his expression serious. You must look into the mirror, Emily. Face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Only then can the curse be broken. Emily swallowed hard. And what if I can't handle it? What if the truth is too much? The girl stepped closer, her small hand reaching out to Emily. You're stronger than you think, she said softly, her voice filled with quiet reassurance. The curse has haunted us for generations. You're the only one who can end it. Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no choice but to face the mirror. She turned back toward it, her eyes locking onto the glass. The surface rippled, like water disturbed by a stone, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she saw a figure standing in the reflection. It was the Vampire King, his face twisted in agony, his eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to pierce through her very soul. The image flickered, and she saw him again, this time standing beside the altar, his expression filled with determination. The room around him was dark, shrouded in shadows. He was alone, as if something had been taken from him, something irreplaceable. The image shifted once more, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. She saw the twins, but they were different. Older, their faces filled with anguish. The boy stood before the mirror, his hand outstretched toward it, but he was being pulled back by something, as though an invisible force was holding him back. The girl, her eyes filled with silent tears, reached out to him, her voice barely a whisper, "Don't touch it." The image disappeared, and Emily was left staring at her own reflection. Her hands were trembling, her heart racing in her chest. She had seen it. The truth, the deep sorrow that bound the Vampire King to the curse. It wasn't just a curse on his family. It was a curse born from his own pain, his own loss. He had tried to protect them, tried to stop the curse from consuming them all, but he had failed. Emily's eyes filled with sympathy, her heart aching for the pain he had endured. She didn't know what she was supposed to do with this knowledge, but she knew one thing for sure. The curse couldn't be broken with just her understanding of the past. It needed something more. The boy spoke, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. You've seen the truth, Emily, he said quietly. But there's one more thing you need to know. Emily turned to him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. What is it? The girl stepped forward, her voice low and filled with a quiet intensity. The curse can only be broken by the one who understands its source, the one who can face the pain it caused. The Vampire King's grief, his regret, is what bound this curse to his bloodline. Emily felt a chill wash over her. What do I have to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The boy's gaze softened, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. You must help him confront the source of his grief, he said. You must help him face what he has lost, what he believes he can never have again. Emily's heart ached at the thought. How could she possibly help him with something so deep, so painful? But how can I do that? She asked. I don't even know how to begin. The girl reached out, her hand gently touching Emily's arm. You already have, she said softly. You've seen the truth. You faced it. Now you must help him find peace. Emily's mind was reeling. How could she help someone so powerful, someone so filled with sorrow, face his own pain? She wasn't sure she had the strength to do it, but the weight of the twins' words, of their trust in her, pressed down on her. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. The Vampire King's past, his grief, his curse, they were all tangled together, and Emily knew she was the key to unlocking it. But could she really help him face it? Could she really break the curse that had haunted them all for so long? She took a deep breath, looking back at the mirror. The surface rippled once more, and she saw the Vampire King's reflection once again. This time, his expression was different. His eyes were not filled with pain, but with something else, something that could only be described as longing. He looked at her, his gaze softening, and for the first time, she saw the person behind the mask. He was not just a king, not just a powerful being shrouded in darkness. He was a man, a father, and above all, a soul tortured by loss. You've seen it, his voice echoed in her mind, a whisper that felt like a call from deep within. Now help me find peace. Emily nodded, her heart heavy with the responsibility that lay ahead. She didn't know how she would do it, but she knew that this was the only path forward. The curse could only be broken if she helped him find peace with his past. She could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, but for the first time since arriving in the castle, she knew what she had to do. The time had come to face the Vampire King's greatest regret, and in doing so, face her own fears. There was no going back now. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she turned toward the Vampire King, her mind still reeling from the weight of the truth she had uncovered. The mirror had shown her not just the curse, but the raw, unspoken pain that bound him to this endless cycle. She felt a new understanding, a new empathy for him, but she also knew the path ahead was filled with darkness, uncertainty, and perhaps even more loss. The castle, once a place of imposing grandeur, now felt like a prison, a place that held the weight of centuries of sorrow. The air was thick with magic, and Emily could feel it pressing down on her, challenging her to rise to the occasion. The Vampire King, standing before her, his expression now softened, seemed like a different person. No longer the cold ruler. He was someone broken, someone in desperate need of the peace she had promised him. But how could she help him find that peace? How could she confront a grief so powerful, so overwhelming, that it had shaped an entire dynasty? The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice quiet but determined. I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to break this curse. The Vampire King's gaze softened, but his eyes were still filled with sorrow. The curse is not just a punishment for me, Emily, he said, his voice low. It is the consequence of a decision made long ago, one that I regret every day. I tried to shield my family from the pain, but in doing so, I only made it worse. Emily's heart ached for him. She could see the weight of his regret in his eyes. What happened? She asked softly. The Vampire King closed his eyes for a moment, his face shadowed by the pain of the memory. I made a pact, he said quietly, to protect my family, to protect my children from the darkness that followed our bloodline. But I did not realize the cost of that decision. I thought I could control it, but in the end, it controlled us. It consumed us. Emily stepped closer, her voice gentle. And the mirror? What does it have to do with all of this? The Vampire King's eyes flickered toward the mirror, his gaze darkening. The mirror is the key, he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. It holds the truth of the curse, the truth of what I have done. But every time I look into it, I see the faces of those I have lost, the choices I made, and the endless sorrow I have caused. It is my punishment, and it is the punishment of my children. We are bound to it. Emily reached out, placing a hand on his arm, offering what little comfort she could. You don't have to carry this alone, she said softly. Let me help you. The Vampire King looked down at her hand, his gaze lingering for a moment before he turned away. "I cannot ask you to take on this burden, Emily," he said, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what it means to live with this kind of regret. This is not your fight. It is now," Emily said, her voice firm. "I've seen the truth. I know what you've sacrificed, and I know what it will cost to set things right. I'm not going anywhere. I won't leave you to face this alone." For a long moment, the Vampire King said nothing. Then, slowly, he turned back to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and something else, perhaps hope. "You would really do this? You would stand by me, even after everything you've learned?" Emily nodded, her expression unwavering. "I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid of the truth. You're not alone, not anymore." The room seemed to grow quieter, the weight of their words settling into the air like a heavy mist. The Vampire King stared at her for a moment longer before he nodded slowly. "Then we must face it together," he said quietly. "We must face the mirror and confront the truth, no matter what it reveals." Emily's heart tightened as she realized what this meant. They would have to return to the mirror, to the very place that held the key to breaking the curse. It would be a battle not just against the curse itself, but against the pain and guilt that had trapped them all for so long. But Emily was ready. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be more secrets to uncover, more truths to face, and more sacrifices to be made. But she also knew that she couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when she had come so far. The Vampire King, despite his power and the darkness that surrounded him, was not invincible. He had his own wounds, his own fears. And Emily, for all her uncertainty and fear, had found her own strength. Together, they would confront the mirror and break the curse. Together, they would face the ghosts of the past and build a future free from the chains that bound them. As they walked back toward the study, Emily could feel the weight of their shared purpose pressing down on her. The curse would be broken, the truth would be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The chamber felt colder than it ever had before as Emily and the Vampire King returned to the study. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence almost suffocating as they stood before the mirror once more. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had promised herself, promised him, that they would face the truth together. But now that the moment was here, she couldn't help the nervous tremble in her hands. She had never faced anything so heavy, so full of power and fear, as the truth that lay within this cursed mirror. The Vampire King stood beside her, his jaw clenched, his usual air of cold control slipping as his eyes flickered to the mirror. There was no turning back now. Emily glanced at him, seeing the hesitation in his eyes. He had lived with this for so long, trying to protect everyone around him from the weight of it. She had no idea how he had managed, how anyone could carry such sorrow for centuries. He met her gaze, and for a moment, there was something in his eyes that softened. Maybe it was the hope she had brought him, or maybe it was the realization that they were not alone in this. Whatever it was, it made Emily stand taller. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, her voice steady. The Vampire King nodded, though his face remained a mask of sorrow. "I've been ready for this moment longer than you can imagine. But I've avoided it, hoping it would go away, hoping I could protect my family from it. But now I know that it can't be avoided." Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward. She reached out to touch the mirror, her fingers brushing the surface as it rippled under her touch. The whispers started almost immediately, soft at first, then growing louder, filling her head with a cacophony of voices, all calling out, all demanding attention. The Vampire King's breath caught as the whispers surrounded them both, the air thick with the voices of the past, the weight of the curse bearing down on them. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. She knew she couldn't let the voices overwhelm her. She had to stay focused. "We're not alone in this," she said softly, her voice cutting through the noise. "We're together, and we can break this." She opened her eyes and looked at the Vampire King, whose gaze had never left her. Slowly, his hand moved to rest on hers, joining her in this final act. His touch was cold, but it was steady, grounding her. The mirror rippled once again, this time with more intensity. The voices began to form shapes, images from the past swirling in front of them. Emily saw the Vampire King's face, younger, filled with hope and determination. She saw him standing in a grand hall, speaking to someone, but the words were lost in the whirlwind of memories. Then the images changed, and the faces of the twins appeared, small, innocent, but their eyes filled with the same sorrow that Emily had seen in their father. She could feel the pain, the weight of the curse pressing in on her. "This is where it started," the vampire king whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is where I made my mistake. The day I tried to protect them from the curse, but I ended up sealing it for all of us." Emily's heart ached for him. She couldn't imagine the burden of living with such regret, of being responsible for a curse that had ruined everything. But she could see now, through the mirror, that it wasn't just the vampire king who suffered. The curse had taken everything from his family. The joy, the innocence, the future. "You can't blame yourself for this," she said softly, her voice filled with conviction. "You didn't know. You tried to protect them." The vampire king turned to her, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "I thought I could protect them, but in doing so, I only made things worse. The curse binds us all to this place, to this mirror. It takes everything from us, piece by piece." Emily's heart tightened as she realized what he meant. This mirror was not just a reflection of the past. It was a prison, a trap that had bound them all. And until the truth was revealed, until they faced the pain that had shaped them, there would be no escape. The room seemed to darken as the images in the mirror shifted once more. This time, Emily saw something different. It was the vampire king, standing alone in a room filled with shadows, his face twisted in grief. She could hear the faint sound of a voice, his voice, calling out, but the words were lost. And then, the image changed again, and she saw him standing with the twins, his arms around them, his face filled with determination. But there was fear there too, fear that they might be lost forever. "What do you see?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. The vampire king's eyes were wide, his gaze fixed on the mirror. "I see the truth," he said, his voice breaking. "I see the moment when I failed them, when I made the decision that damned us all." Emily could feel the sorrow in his voice, the weight of the regret that had haunted him for so long. But there was something else there too, something that was shifting. She squeezed his hand, grounding him. "It's not too late," she said, her voice firm. "We can break this curse. Together." The mirror rippled one last time, and Emily felt a surge of energy fill the room. The whispers stopped, the images faded, and for the first time, the room was silent. She looked at the vampire king, her eyes filled with determination. "It's done," she said. The curse had been broken. They had faced the truth, together. And now, they could begin to rebuild. The mirror had shown them the past, but it no longer had power over them. The weight of the curse had lifted, and for the first time in centuries, there was hope. They had broken the chains that had bound them, and the future was theirs to shape. The air in the castle felt different now, lighter somehow, as though the weight of centuries of suffering had been lifted. Emily stood with the vampire king in the quiet aftermath, the mirror now just a silent, empty frame. The room, once filled with dark energy, now seemed to hum with a new, softer presence. She could still feel the echoes of the curse, but they were fading, like a storm passing after the thunder has died down. The vampire king looked at the mirror, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and something else, perhaps gratitude, or the first flicker of peace he had known in years. The twins, who had stood silently beside them throughout the entire ordeal, now approached cautiously, their faces softened by the absence of the curse's grip. The boy looked at Emily, his eyes filled with something unfamiliar, trust. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed at peace, and the girl, usually so distant, now gave her a small, hesitant smile. Emily returned the smile, though she still felt a lingering uncertainty. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had made it through the hardest part. The curse had been broken, and the future was uncertain, but it was no longer dictated by the past. "It's over," Emily whispered, almost to herself. "The curse is finally gone." The vampire king nodded, his expression still filled with sorrow, but now it was tinged with something else, a lightness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in centuries. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "You've done what I could never do. You've freed us." Emily shook her head, feeling the weight of his gratitude but knowing it wasn't just her who had done this. "We did this together," she replied softly. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of you." The boy, still standing by his sister, nodded, his expression solemn. Now we can begin again, he said, his voice steady, though there was still a hint of the weight they all carried. The past is gone, but the future is still ours to shape. The girl, who had been so quiet throughout their ordeal, spoke up in a small, almost shy voice. What happens now? She asked. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The Vampire King seemed to consider it, his gaze drifting toward the castle's grand windows, where the first rays of dawn were beginning to filter through. The storm that had raged outside for so long had finally passed, and the sky was beginning to clear. We rebuild, he said quietly. We start anew, as a family, without the weight of the curse hanging over us. There is still much to be done, and the world will not be kind. But we have each other now, and that is enough. Emily felt a surge of hope rise within her, a feeling that had been absent for so long. The future wasn't set, but it wasn't as bleak as it had once seemed. They could shape it, together, and that was more than she had ever hoped for when she first arrived in the castle. The journey they had taken had been dark and full of danger, but it had brought them all closer. The Vampire King, for all his power, was not invincible, and the twins, though cursed, had their own strength. Emily had learned so much about herself, too, about the courage she didn't know she had, and about the love that could grow even in the darkest places. What about you? She asked, her voice soft. What will you do now? The Vampire King looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to read her thoughts. I will stay here, he said, his voice quiet but certain. I've been away from my family for too long. I need to make amends. I need to show them that I am here, not as a king, but as a father, as someone who can be trusted again. Emily nodded, understanding what he meant. He had been so consumed by the curse, by the fear of losing his family, that he had forgotten how to truly be with them. But now, he had a chance to change that, to rebuild the relationships that had been shattered. And what about the castle? She asked. It's been a place of darkness for so long. What will happen to it now? The Vampire King looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time in a different light. The castle will change, he said, his voice steady. It is no longer a prison, no longer a place of sorrow. It will be a home again, one that is filled with love, not fear. And we will make it a place where the past does not haunt us, where we can finally move forward. Emily felt a smile tug at her lips, though it was a smile full of both sadness and hope. The journey had been long, and the path ahead would still be filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, she felt as though they had won something important. Not just a battle, but a chance at a future that was no longer bound by the curse. The past was gone, and the future was theirs to create. And that, Emily realized, was the greatest victory of all. The days that followed felt strangely peaceful. The storm had passed, and the air around the castle had lightened. No longer was it a place heavy with the weight of sorrow, secrets, and curses. It was becoming a home again. Emily stood at the edge of the grand hall, looking out at the garden beyond. The sky was clear, the sunlight streaming through the windows and casting a warm glow on the stone walls. It was a new beginning. The Vampire King, now more at ease than he had ever been, had spent the past few days reconnecting with his children. The boy, who had once been distant and cold, now followed his father around the castle, looking at him with new eyes, as if he were seeing him for the first time. The girl, usually quiet and reserved, had started to smile more, her laughter filling the halls in a way that hadn't been heard in years. It was as if the curse had been a barrier that had kept them all apart, and now, with that barrier gone, they were learning how to be a family again. Emily had been by their side, helping where she could, but more than that, she had become a part of this family. The Vampire King had made her feel welcomed, valued, as though she had always belonged here. But despite the progress, Emily knew that the past would never be completely gone. There would always be scars, reminders of the darkness that had once consumed them. Still, there was hope now, and that was something none of them had dared to hope for before. As she turned to leave the hall, she found herself face to face with the Vampire King. He was watching her, his eyes still filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He stepped closer, his presence a quiet comfort in the midst of the transformation taking place around them. I never thanked you properly, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. For what you've done, for breaking the curse, for helping us heal. Emily shook her head, smiling gently. You don't need to thank me, she replied. I couldn't have done it without all of you. He took a deep breath, his gaze turning distant for a moment. I've spent so long hiding from my past, running from the consequences of my choices. I thought I could protect my family by keeping them in the dark, by keeping them away from the curse. But in the end, it was the truth that set us free. And you? He paused, looking at her with a sincerity that made her heart ache. You helped me face that truth. You helped me see that the only way forward was together. Emily's heart swelled with emotion at his words. She had never imagined that something like this, something so unexpected, so full of love and hope, could come from the darkness that had once surrounded them all. I'm just glad I could help, she said quietly, her voice soft. But you did the hardest part. You faced your past. You gave your family a chance at a future. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his features and made him appear, for the first time, truly at peace. We all did. Together. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle in her chest. Together, they had faced the past, the pain, and the curse. And together, they would build a future. As they stood there, the sounds of the twins' laughter echoing through the halls, Emily realized just how much had changed. The Vampire King was no longer just a ruler, no longer just a figure of power and fear. He was a father, a man who had faced his own darkness and come out the other side, ready to embrace the light. The twins, once marked by the curse, were now free to grow, to live without the shadow of the past hanging over them. And Emily had found a place in this world, a family that had accepted her, a home that had once seemed so distant now felt like it belonged to her too. She looked out toward the garden, the sunlight bathing the flowers in a golden hue, and for the first time, she felt the weight of the world fall away. There were no more ghosts, no more curses, no more fears of what the future might hold. All that mattered now was the present. They had won. And though the road ahead would never be completely free of challenges, Emily knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. The curse had been broken. The past had been faced. And now, they had a future, one that was theirs to shape. She turned back toward the Vampire King, smiling as the twins ran toward them, their laughter filling the air like music. The darkness had passed, and in its place, there was only light. And for the first time in a long time, Emily could see that the future was brighter than it had ever been. Vampire stories have always captivated audiences with their dark magic, ancient curses, and complex characters. In this tale, a vampire king and his family struggle with a curse that has haunted them for centuries, and the arrival of a brave maid who becomes the key to their salvation. As the story unfolds, the maid and the vampire king work together to break the curse, confronting deep sorrow, regret, and the weight of their past decisions. This gripping journey through the vampire world explores themes of redemption, love, and the strength found in unity. In vampire stories, the journey to uncover dark secrets and face personal demons is never easy, but it is always rewarding. As Emily helps the Vampire King and his children overcome the shadows of their past, she too learns that the only way to move forward is to face the truth. With the curse finally broken, they must now rebuild their lives, but the bonds they've formed will guide them toward a brighter future. Vampire stories often feature complex relationships, and this one is no different, as the characters learn that true strength lies in understanding and support. With each new revelation, the Vampire King and his family find healing, proving that even in the darkest of places, love and redemption are possible. This story is a perfect example of how vampire stories intertwine love, danger, and the ultimate battle for freedom from ancient curses.